Hello and welcome to another episode of Agile Amplified. I'm your host Vijay, and I'm thrilled to have Janani Chandran, a seasoned leader in the world of agile and digital transformation, joining us. She brings in a wealth of experience in guiding organizations through agile adoption. Janani has been instrumental in driving innovation, fostering high performance teams, and enabling business to embrace agility at scale. Her passion for continuous improvement and her strategic mindset make her a sought after expert in agile coaching and transformation leadership. In this episode, we'll dive into her experience, insights, and the lessons she brings along the way. I'd like to take up this opportunity to once again welcome Janani onto Agile Amplified. It's an honor to have you on the show, Janani.
Thank you so much, Vijay. I see that, it's an honor for me to be here and share my expertise with you.
Janani, can you start off by telling us a bit about your career journey? We'd like to understand how you transitioned into project management.
Sure, why not? Vijay, as you would have read about me as well, I used to be a software engineer and a QA in my early career days. And as I say, software engineer and QA, I wanted to know how things work. But then there was a curious side of me that wanted to explore more. There was a time in 2012, I was a new mother and I was also going through a retrenchment at that time. And what happened is that as I started applying for roles as a QA engineer or QA lead, there used to be companies which used to say, I don't think so, you can work at this point. You are a new mom, you have your baby responsibilities and things. I don't think so, we are ready to hire you. As a QA, you would be required to do lots of uh, shift work or lots of overtime. I don't think so, you are prepared. At that point, I had to think again. Am I going to go back and work as what I was doing before my retrenchment? Or am I going to use the skills that I have built in the last 7, 8 years? What are my passions? What are my strongest skill sets? Where could I utilize it in a better way? And that was at that point, I went to a coach and I explored what could be the right options. Where should I transition? And at the first meet itself, my coach rightly told me, you'd be a right fit for project management. You are a people's person. You have excellent communication and stakeholder management skills. Why don't you give it a try? You'd be a good project manager. So I think I took his words very seriously at that point, and I really thank him for that advice. That took me to greater heights. And from there, I started exploring what are my strongest skill sets. What were the skills that I had already built? How well did I understand end to end system functionalities, right? How could I take it to the next level in utilizing it as a project manager? So, there started a journey as a project manager. And Vijay, as I say this right, I would also say that since I did not come as a seasoned project manager at that time, my journey was full of trials and errors. I had failures. I had my life changing moments. I think all those failures shaped me better as a project manager. So now, when I confidently lead these $2 million or $3 million projects, right, I'm not worried much because the kind of experience that I have had, the failures, the lessons that the failures taught me are leading me in a better way. So that's all about me.
I mean, absolutely. We've all gone through that state of failure, learning from them. And that is, in a way, lessons learned register for project managers, right? I'd like to understand from you what is one failure that has stuck to with you, and you are always cautious about that particular point, not repeating ever again in your career.
Well, I'll talk about the first program. I was writing about it as well recently. The first program that I managed, right, it was catering to multiple countries. And at that point, I should say, I was still a novice there. And we started gathering requirements. We were more worried about the high level functionalities. What are we going to do? How are we going to digitize the system? We got all the important features and functions ready. However, we missed out on minute details like this is going to be an app, it is going to be displayed on iOS and Android. How much does the background of this app matter? We forgot that very important point. So as that app was developed with that particular background, it was a common background, right? It was catering to multiple countries. I'll tell you how the background looked. It was a little girl, say 7, 8 year old, standing under an umbrella, and it was a rainy day. See, it could be translated into, it was an insurance company. So if you look at the greener picture of it, it is like, on a rainy day, we are here like an umbrella to protect you, right? That is the way you look at it. When we presented it, it was almost nearing UAT stage. Two of the countries had a shock. They said, look at the girl at that moment. I don't think so. This could be going into the market. This shows poverty. We have to think about the economic status. This will not work in our countries. I had a big shock at that point. I'm like, this is such a small details, and umbrella was the kind of protection that we are offering through insurance. What's wrong, guys? I couldn't understand their perspective. That is where I did a bit more research and I understood the countries, what they wanted to say. The stakeholders from those two countries meant that the GDP of those two countries were higher than the others. To them, probably their standards were much higher. So this couldn't be taken into the market. It couldn't be handed over to so many insurance agents who were trying to digitize the system. So that was a complete life changing moment at that point, because I never thought that the background of a particular iOS or an Android app could be so important. I was like, at that point, guys, look at the functionality. We have digitized the app itself. There's no more paper based application. See, smaller things like this block you even from trying out the app. That was a lesson that I learned. Every perspective matters and every minute detail matters. The biggest lesson there, at the start of this project, we should have sent a business analyst to understand how should the background look like. In a word, this is a personal brand, right? If you talk about this application, this is the personal brand that an insurance agent is carrying to every person to trying to sell a insurance policy. So this is the personal brand that we carry. It had to be in a much better, larger scale. It could have been done in a much better way. So that is where I realized that as a project manager, we shouldn't have this assumptions that smaller details could be ignored, or this is a thing that is like non-negotiable. So we don't take that call. Rather rely on your business, rather rely on your stakeholders.
That is a key takeaway. I mean, put it all in paper, get that acknowledged with the stakeholders that need to acknowledge them, and get the project going. Interesting takeaway there. I'd like to touch upon your experience with building projects team for success. Right. I mean, the reason why I say this is because when I was looking at your profile, one thing that stood out to me is multiple project managers have collaborated in your teams, and they've delivered successful projects in the past, and you've led global teams like that. So I'd like to understand from you, as a program leader, what do you look for in a project manager when you are building a project team? Let's say there is a huge engagement with you, and then you got to get in your first project manager. How would you go about with that interview experience, and what would be the things that you would look after as a program leader?
Well, I would say I'll tell you a small story that has stuck with me for years, and I'll try to relate it here. I hope you'll agree with me. See, imagine a gardener who had just started planting rose. His inspiration was the gardeners around him who planted rose, and they were seeing beautiful flowers in their garden. The first thing he saw was in others' garden, the roses had already started blooming while his rose hadn't. He went and first pleaded to his rose plant, look at the other roses. They have started blooming. Where are you? What are you doing? Next day he came back, nothing happened. A few days later, he saw again the plants were full of roses. So he went back, and this time he scolded and he demanded his rose plants that you have to start flowering, otherwise I cut you down. That's a second mistake he did. Nothing happened after that. And then came in a sudden moment where he realized probably I'm doing something wrong. He went and spoke to the other gardeners. What are you doing differently from me? How is that your rose plants are blooming and mine is not? That is where he understood that the rose plant needed care. It needed some nutrients, it needed fertilizers. Let's go back and put it down in our teams. See, you go and fight back with your team members. You are not performing like that team, it's not going to work. You go and plead with them. you know what, guys, you have to save our day. Come on, you can do it. That will also not work. What will work is ramping up to the needed skill set. Let's talk about an integration project. Is your team aligned on what is the problem that we are solving? What is this project going to do? If you are looking at integrating a payment solution, do they understand the end to end flow of this project? Do they even understand what problem are we going to solve for the greater good, right? What happens after we integrate? Only when they understand what is the problem, you come up to the next, where are we failing, what are the skill sets needed. When you understand these both points, you come up with a comprehensive plan. I think you are right now lagging behind in collaborating with the stakeholder. Oh, you are still struggling to go into the executive meeting and present a project report. So now I know that where you are failing is your executive communication skills. Or you are failing in your risk management when it comes to multiple systems. So why don't we sit down and explore how do you do a risk response for these kind of risks, or how do you take it during your weekly status meetings across different teams? So you will have to dissect, you will have to understand what are your team skill sets, capabilities, and also weaknesses.
Interesting. I mean, you talked about a lot of pointers there, which again pings back to, let's say, project management KPIs, right? I mean,
Right?
these are KPI measurements that you would have for a project manager.
Right?
Now, my follow up question to that would be, what would be your key KPIs if you have to measure a project team's success? Let's
Sure.
say we'll take it like we'll take it in two parts. The
Hmm.
first one is going to be how would you manage? I mean, how would you measure your KPIs of the project teams, and how would you measure the KPIs of your project manager? Maybe we'll start off with project teams, and then we'll go to the project manager. Does that
Okay,
sound good?
sure. Sure. Why not? Then I would like to classify them in three different buckets. Let's start with the business KPIs. Have we
Mhm.
understood the project's goal? The first business KPI is for in terms of revenue or in terms of growth. You have some business opportunities when you start a project, isn't it, Vijay? You also agree with that. So let's look from a business perspective. When I have a project KPIs, what is this project supposed to achieve? If you're looking at Facebook or some other social media, they would have had a feature added on for expansion. End of this project, are we bringing on those many active users into the project? That is a business KPI. Or in terms of monetization, I was expecting a 1 million revenue in the next 6 months. Did that actually happen? That's a revenue tied with the project. Let's come into the second goal that is very important to a project manager. That is in terms of our own constraints. Did we meet the scope that we agreed to at the first place? What about our timelines? Did we adhere to the timelines? Did the milestones happen as per our plan? Did we release as per the plan? Come up to the cost. You set in a cost with some kind of 10% buffer or 15% buffer. Were you able to deliver within that project budget? Or did we go overboard? Or there are even projects where we committed to 1 million budget and we use only 40% of it. I don't see a success there. We were failing in the estimation. Then comes in the fourth constraint, which is quality. How well did we go into the release? Where how what kind of defects did we face after we went into live? Lots of issues kept coming in. Then I don't think so it was a successful project if it kept burning those midlight oils, right? So that's not a success. So I would say for a project manager, cost, quality, scope, all these are very important because these are directly tied to your goals. Okay, so these are very important. These are the goals that a project manager has to do. Next, let's come up to the goals or the KPIs which people don't track. You know what they are? How well did I manage the risk in this project?
Yeah.
How well, right? We forget to manage that. How well did I manage my stakeholders? What do my stakeholders tell? How was it working on this project? Now, you go to team A. Team A might say, oh, Janani did a good job. She sent us the weekly status report. We were a part of the risk management strategy. It was so good. Team B, I would have ignored them. You go to them. Who, Janani? Oh, she didn't even consider us. So that's a failure point, right? How well did I manage my stakeholders? And because I come from the e-commerce side, I'm going to add one more criteria here. Let's add about something like the NPS score. What do our people say about it,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
That's a really good indicator. Yeah.
You go back to Facebook example, you launch that feature. Are people happy with that feature? Are people complaining? I know about projects which gets launched and people talk either positive things or negative things on Twitter. That is an NPS score directly indicative of how well you did in your project. So let me summarize it quickly. We'll talk about the business goals. What is your project supposed to do? Let's talk about the project management KPIs in terms of the four constraints. We'll talk about the constraints which is indirectly impacting in terms of your NPS scores or your stakeholder management skills, your risk management skills. So all these are the KPIs that are directly tying up to your project manager's KPIs. How well your project did is depending on these buckets.
That's so nicely put. Given my experience working for a customer success product in the past, I do understand and can relate to how important or crucial is an NPS metric or a CSAT metrics for that matter, because those are the metrics that we even recommend SaaS organizations as an indicator for their product's success as well and the continuity of their customers with their product. So absolutely a critical point when it comes to relationship building, because these feedbacks is what is going to keep the project managers communication with the stakeholders continuous and neat, right?
Right, right.
So yeah, that's an interesting observation,
And
and I'm
Vijay, sorry to interrupt. I'll add one more point here. See, often what happens is after we hit all these KPIs and we release the project managers also often tend to forget what has happened. I would also make a recommendation here. If you have to strongly tie it up with your KPIs, once your project has hit the goal, go back to your project team, showcase to them what have we achieved with this project. Our daily active count has gone up or our revenue has gone up. Our team needs motivation too.
right.
Sometimes, right, you might have seen with your engineers as well, they would have lost focus because they did not get that appreciation after that project went live. So why are we failing there?
Absolutely critical. I mean, sometimes the weekly status reports that we share with the leadership, I always recommend that we don't do that with just the leadership folks. Obviously, there are certain numbers that are very private to the leadership, but then there are things that are happening in the project that needs to be cascaded and informed to our project team members as well. So if you can run a quick weekly summary of what the team achieved or a monthly summary of what the team achieved, things like that, and it's direct relevance to the numbers, like you rightly put. Those are the things that the team are going to thrive on. Absolutely a critical point, and sometimes having that morale maintained throughout the project also becomes the responsibility of the project manager. I can't agree with you more. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, and when I like I said, when I reached out to you, one thing that stood out in your, let's say, resume is that you've worked across geographies. You've worked in Asia. You've worked in, yeah, when I say Asia, you've worked Singapore, Japan, India. You've worked at multiple geographies on the eastern part of the world,
Hmm.
and you do have experience in the European region,
Yeah.
and now you are in the US, right? So how does project management differ across geographies? Maybe we'll start off with how interviews differ, right? When we apply for jobs as a project manager in Japan, we apply for a job for a project manager. How is that different from that of applying in US? What are the expectations of a project manager in both these geographies? Is there any difference, or it's holistically the same?
See, I think as practices, they are similar. I wouldn't say they are same, they are similar. However, I see that in the western side of the world, in the US and North American region, the project manager has more authority. When we go back to the east, right, I see that the project manager still is lagging on that authority, but the project manager is still very close to the development and the engineering teams. I also see that at this point, project managers are able to understand the end to end flow because they are so closely working with the teams that they understand status of, it's like, example I'll give you. Somebody says, okay, we're running on sprint one and this particular API deployment has been delayed. I see that the project manager does understand what is happening. In Asia, project manager is still required to understand that level of details, work with the teams, and keep their motivation on. And now, here in the US, I see it's a completely different game. I see them as technical project managers. I see them as a person with authority who is able to own that particular project, who is able to take it to executive level meetings, and so on. That is certain times missing in Asia. In Asia, you do have the management structure in such a way that the executives might not know who is the face behind the project. Your reports might be presented by somebody else. So often you lose your credits in that way. Coming up to interviews, Vijay, when we look from the Asian perspective on the interviews, no one asks you for a portfolio of projects. You'd notice that. In the West, I see people ask me, do you have a portfolio of projects? What were the kind of budgets you oversaw? No one asked in Asia, or I never asked in any of the interviews. In interviews, rather, we focus on how big was your team size? What was your routine like? What kind of programs did you manage? Did you do the P&L statements? Did you take care of operations as well? What happened on the scope management? How was your change management process? We go into too much of details. However, in US, as I said, it's treated as a leadership. So people rather focus on the executive leadership style there.
So
That's a
what is
way
the
we look.
adaptation that yeah? So what are the adaptation that someone has to go through right from being a project manager in the Asia now moving to all the way across the world in the US? How do they go through that? Let's say bringing in that leadership influence and projecting them as a leader who's run projects, right? From being an operational project manager, let's say, let's put it that way for a lack of better word, to being a leader who's managed portfolios of projects.
Right.
How does this transition happen?
Two things. Up your communication. It is a must. So let's go back to the Asia example where I said you are not presenting to the executive committee. There might be a manager above you who is presenting on behalf of you. So that is where we will need to up our communication style. If I had to present the same report to the C suites or to the executives, how am I going to do? Try to become a better public speaker. That is something Asians are still failing at. You will need to up the game there. Next thing is build your personal brand. Like if Janani is known for something in Asia, people still okay agree. I might not go out and shout it out loud. I would say that if you have to survive in the West as a project manager, you need to have your personal aura to highlight as a personal brand. What are your strongest skill set? Where did you go and present? Are you a good people's person or are you a good public speaker? Your skills has to speak for you. You should have a personal brand for you. So I say in terms of communication, I speak in terms of personal brand. And the third thing is your presence. Who knows you? What are you associated with? Did you go to any of the forums and speak? Were you there in that particular agile event? People ask for that kind of credibility. So I have a strong recommendation to the Asian project managers who are trying to make a mark probably in the West. This is a right time. Look at building your communication skills. Vijay, you also agree, right? We do have lots of introvert project managers. They probably, yeah. So in my case, right, I normally accept people the way they are. As I had my team as well, I used to say it is okay. You are an introverted project manager. So rather, you treat your return communication as a skill set. Try to build that meaningful conversations. However, I see those are the people who might be impacted because they are still shy of showcasing their personal brand. They're showcasing their magnetic presence. They're not showcasing their magnetic presence, and often they fail to go into those executive meetings. So they have to pick up.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think those are certain skill sets that project managers will have to develop over a period of time. But then I'm going to put you on a spot here and then ask you a question. That let's say if Janani is starting off her project management career right now. Like uh, you're just starting it right now, and then you have the AI coming into picture. You have technology advancements and the role in itself evolving. We see technical program managers coming up, program managers as a role popping up as well, and the role of a Scrum Master intersection with product management, and all of these are coming up, right? So as a project manager, if you have to give yourself an advice, if Janani is starting out right now, what would be the advice that you would give? There are a lot of terms that are overwhelming for project managers, not just project
Right.
managers, in the field of management in itself. So where do we start?
Well, Vijay, agree with me or not, adaptability is the key. I think I have seen project manager terms and processes change so much, right? See, we started with traditional, the waterfall method, where we used to agree on the scope 100 times before we could start on the development. And the
Yeah.
development cycle took 2 to 5 years long, correct, right? That's how we all started. And now you have moved into Agile or Scrum, where you have the timelines is fixed. You know that a release has to happen every second week. It's up to the Scrum Master here to see how many tickets could be fixed within that timeline, and we release it. And then came in, I think, the PI planning and stuffs like that, where you are looking at a 3 month window, correct, right? You are looking at what features could I deliver within that 3 month window. So project management is highly adaptable. It is changing. So, the best advice I would like to give myself is be on par with technology. To be very frank, when I graduated out of college, I was not given this advice at that point that things are going to change at a very faster pace. There is no way that whatever you have studied in your engineering, you're going to use it for the rest of your life. That's not going to happen at all. So, I think project managers have to have this dedicated amount of time every week to continuously learn. One more example I'll give you is in the last 2 years, what have I learned is I've learned to utilize ChatGPT. I can write a PRD using PRD GPT, by the way. I
Fair
know how
enough.
to use Claude very well. I know how to get a good
Right.
risk register out of Claude. I have also tried using Copilot. Copilot used to summarize these huge documents for me within a paragraph. Or there used to be people who used to send me 6 page, 8 page resumes. Can you believe it? I used to ask Copilots, do they have these skills? Can you help me check? So, all that as a project manager, what I have learned is be adaptable. Try to use what are the new technologies that is popping up. They are your best friend. They're not going to make your life miserable. They are the ones going to help you. So, this is the best advice I'll give. You are not going to have the same skill throughout your career.
Can't agree with you more. I mean, sometimes I look at project managers who are reluctant to upgrade themselves or upskill themselves on the technology front, and they are left behind, sadly, right?
Right.
This is something that we will have to, keep improving. Maybe you don't code anymore. Maybe you're not using your GitHubs and code anymore, but then automating certain things. First thing that we start off with, like let's say being a project manager, is we operate in chaos. We bring structure to chaos. That's
Right.
what project managers do.
Right.
And if you can't bring structure to your own chaos, which is your projects,
Yeah.
and automate some of those functions, get that streamlined, make sure that you use AI to save time in a lot of things that you do, right from meeting notes. Earlier it used to be, we used to sit in a meeting taking notes, not even trying to contribute to the conversation, because it used to be very difficult doing both of it, like contributing to
Exactly.
the conversation, making sure we capture every sort of information that the entire meeting group presents. That was difficult. Now we do have tools for that. Like we do
Yeah.
have teams having an integrated, AI solution for that, like capturing meeting notes and all of that. Right from that to even the podcast that I just recorded today has a lot of AI functionalities that I had to use, to make my life easier. So, like you rightly mentioned, we will have to adapt along with the changing dynamics in technology as well as in project management space. In project management space, obviously, like you mentioned, there are multiple terms that comes in, but then it's the core job is still project management, managing a project, delivering successfully, a piece of work, right? So with that, I think we are coming towards the end of this
Sure.
segment of this podcast. It was a wonderful conversation with Janani. Firstly, I'd like to thank Janani for this podcast episode. There are a lot more podcast recordings that are in progress right now. It's going to be available sooner at Agile Amplified, but I wanted to make sure that talking to Janani, who's worked across the world now in a lot of geographies. I'm not sure if you've not covered any specific continent in your resume, but that's the breadth of experience that she comes up with. Thank you so much for being part of the Agile Amplified, and it was a pleasure hosting you. And hoping to have you in another episode discussing something completely different. I know you have a lot of product management experience as well. I want to pick your brain on that as well. But this was an amazing conversation. Thanks for your time, Janani.
Thank you, Vijay, for having me. And as you said a word, project managers are the ones leading chaos into clarity. So let's end our conversation with that. We are project and program managers. We are the ones who use our communication, who use our collaboration skills to turn chaos into clarity. With that, I would definitely end. Thank you so much.